Good afternoon, everybody. Venerable monks and nuns and sisters and brothers. The NGO has asked me to talk about for mindfulness to the audience which I am meeting mostly for the first time. You might have met me before, but I do not remember personally, most of you. And the subject for mindfulness is actually the translation of Sanskrit term for Smrit Upasthana, or in Tibetan Tembanyor Shaba Shi. So it is difficult to deal with because of many limitations and inadequacy on my part. The first problem is the language. I was told that the language should be English, which I never learned, and also it is not friendly with me because from 1959 till 1962 or 63, I resist from learning this language in spite of many my close friends persuaded me to learn, and later on I have to pick up a little bit because of some constraints in my discharging my responsibilities in Shimla. So therefore, at many times I feel difficult to articulate my thinking, my thoughts into language. So this is our first limitation. And the second limitation is by not knowing the audience, what are your interests, what are your expectations from this talk, and also how much Buddhist dharma or philosophy background you have. So therefore, if I talk from strictly Buddhist philosophical viewpoint, it may not be comprehensible or understandable for those who does not have a background of Buddhist learning. And apart from that, the third problem is the common understanding of mindfulness in these days in the West. And the technicality of the Buddhist canon about mindfulness, and particularly this 4 category of mindfulness, the Chatush Anusimit Prasthana, that is a particular passage of path. It is an integral part of Buddhist practice, right from the Samvara mark, the first stage, till the Buddha nature. And it has a vast gradation and way of practicing. So without proper learning of Buddhist Abhisamaya Alankar, in our monastery, in my monastery, we have to spend 6 years to learn the Abhisamaya treatise. And this 4 mindfulness is we used to study in the 6th year. It is extensively explained in the 4th chapter of Abhisamaya Alankar. The 37 part of the purity side, the 4 mindfulness is the first group. There are 7 different groups, and among them it is first group. So in that way, the understanding of memory, it is actually the smrit is, if I translated verbatim, literally it is memory, not as a mindfulness, it's a memory. In Tibetan language it's called as a Temba Nyor Shaba. Memory is a part of the total mindfulness. Usually the total mindfulness has 2 facets of mind. The first is memory, and the second is awareness. I use awareness, I don't know it is exactly the literary translation of the Sanskrit term sampragyana. The smrit and sampragyana working together is a kind of force which can watch the mind in a totality. So this kind of 2 facets of mind working together, the memory and the sampragyana. Today the combination of sampragyana and memory, which is being translated into a English term mindfulness by many scholars, and they have in America they have now regular courses on mindfulness, and particularly the very famous course which recently developed, recently means last few years, social emotional learning, CEL in short term, and it become a regular course in many educational institutions. And in that The Buddhist way of practicing the mindfulness has used extensively, but it is not the same. I can't say it is just exactly the same what the Buddhists do practice as a mindfulness, and particularly the 4 category of mindfulness, which is a part and also which is a ground of all meditation. Since I am not knowing your background and the capacity to comprehend this talk, I think I should touch little bit the very basic things about meditation. Without having a basic understanding what is meditation, then the talking about mindfulness has not much relevance. It might be useful for stress management or releasing your tension. That is a side business. It's not the basic purpose of the meditation mindfulness. It may help to calm down your mind, or to release some of tensions, or to recover from depression, so on and so forth. But that is the not real purpose of meditation. If you have a good background about Buddhist meditation, then my talk may be not very useful for you, but I'm taking for the beginners, newcomers, who does not have a preliminary knowledge what is meditation. Many people do ask why we should meditate. A number of times journalists or some writers put this question to me, why we should meditate. So I have not direct answer to that question. Then I used to ask why we should take food, why we should take bath. It is why it is necessary. Then he says, the people says, we must take food to sustain our body, to take bath for the hygiene of the body. Then my response to them used to be, we shall have to meditate because we have to sustain the mind as well, not only the body. The mind also needs some nourishment. And also we should meditate. Mental and emotional hygiene is also necessary. Only health of body does not make a total health of a person. A total healthy person means who has a disease-free body and purity of mind. If these two comes together, then this person can be considered as a healthy person. So meditation is to nourish the mind and evolve the mind, cultivate the mind and make it the purity and fully awakened, as this has the potential of fully awakened. The modern science people, neurologists say that the human brain is in usage very small portion of it. We never able to use the 100% of brain capacity, and only some portion or some percentage of brain cells are in usage or in active. Similarly, the potential of mind is unlimited, and the usage of our mind in ordinary life is, I don't think, not more than 2% of the mental capacity, and for many people perhaps less than 2% of the mental capacity. 98%, 99% it goes in the West and it is not in usage. So therefore, to put the potential of mind in use and let it flower in its total capacity. It has immense capacity, and if we put total capacity, then the person can able to perform great things and serve the humanity or serve the sentient beings in a very unlimited way. What means the Buddha? The Buddha means awakened person. What means awakened? All the hindrances or contamination or coverage of mind is completely destroyed or completely do away, and the mind has put in its full capacity, full awakening. That is the Buddha nature. So each one of us has the capacity to achieve that Buddha nature, and in order to achieve that Buddha nature, we have to cultivate the mind in right direction. The Buddhist basic concept is that the mind is not contaminated to its nature. All the defaultments and contaminations are temporary, which does not touch the nature of the mind, but it dilutes the mind temporarily, so which can be removed and which can be do away. The logic behind it is that all the mental defaultments are a result of our ignorance, our misconception about the self. The Atma Dharana, that means the misconception of the self, are in a philosophical terminology, the soul, a permanent soul, unchangeable soul, something like that. On that we have a great misconception. That is, the Buddhist terminology, we call it avidya, maripa or tome maripa. That avidya dilutes to seeing the self as it is, and it is diluted, and it is misconceived something, existence of independent self, inherently existing of independent self. Since that is misconception, and that does not based on the ground reality, it can be removed, because the opposite thing, the perception of no existence of such inherent, independent, undependent thing, a soul does not exist. So that is reality that can be perceived, that can be in the beginning inferred, and finally it can be perceived. So therefore all the mental defaultments, the cause of mental defaultment is eradicable, and once this cause is eradicated, then the rest of the mental defaultments can be completely do away. So this is the logic that every sentient being has the potential to reach up to the Buddha nature, to reach the complete awakening of the mind. For that, we need to achieve the perception of the truth, the ultimate truth, that is the wisdom. And to achieve such wisdom, the mind shall have to be consolidated its whole strength and potential in order to search and perceive the ultimate truth. It needs a power of attention, and for achieving such power of attention, we also need physical and vocal discipline. So therefore the entire Buddha's teaching can be summed up in these threefold education, Trisiksha, the moral conduct, Shila, and the attentive mind, the Samadhi, and the awakened mind, the wisdom. So the final stage is wisdom, and in order to achieve the wisdom, we need the concentrative mind, and for that we also need certain code of conduct and way of life. So the moral conduct, the meditative mind, meditative stability of mind, and the awakening of mind, these are the threefold teachings of the entire Buddhist canon. So therefore the meditation is the second stage of Buddhist practice. The first stage is to restrain from negative acts and to accumulate the positive acts, that is moral discipline, moral discipline for household people, refraining from 10 negative acts and so on and so forth. For seminaries and for bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, they have different categories of shield, categories of conduct, and all these are the first level of the practice, and then meditation is necessary. So the meditative mind or meditative practice of meditation largely categorize either in two groups or in three groups. If I mention the first one, the two group is concentrative meditation and analytical meditation, contemplative and concentrative. Concentrative meditation is to achieve the shamatha. Shamatha means a state of mind which can completely, fully attend to one object for a couple of hours, and thereby the person can achieve the upper realm mind. The upper realm mind is not, the world is categorized into the Kama Dhatu, Rupa Dhatu, Arupa Dhatu, the three different realm. These three different realm are categorized by from the state of mind. The state of mind, the Rupa Dhatu state of mind is, we call it Samten. There are four different Samten Tambu, Samten Niva, Samten Sumba, Samten Shiva. These are the capacity to attentive to one object with so clarity, without any disturbance, sinking or scatteredness. So this kind of mindset is called shamatha, and which gives your mind a tremendous capacity, and also which gives your body so light and can be work almost 24 hours without any tiredness. So this is the object of the meditation. Then that kind of concentration also need, within this concentration you need to have the capacity to do the analytical meditation. Analytical meditation is searching, researching, or analyzing, reasoning, and arguing, so that you can go in the deepest level of the object, so thereby the ultimate reality, the Paramat Satya, the ultimate truth can be perceived, that can only perceived from the analytical mind. So that analytical mind is called Vipassana, seeing specially, or seeing something divinative quality. So these two are the major category of the meditation. And apart from that, there can be different categories. One category is meditating on something objectively and analyzing them, or seeing them, that is one kind of meditation. And the other kind of meditation is the training and cultivating the mind. And the third kind of meditation is visualization. So in this category, if I give an example, if you are meditating on impermanence or meditating on nature of misery, the dukkha arya satya, or meditating on shunyata, these are the meditative mind is a subject and it puts on a different object, meditating some outside object. That means to understand the nature of impermanence, to understand the nature of shunyata, to understand the nature of the cessation of all misery, something like that. This is called objective meditation. And cultivating meditation is the meditation of love, meditation of kindness, meditation of compassion. And this meditation is not meditating objectively, something outside. The mind itself shall have to be converted into a nature of compassion, nature of love, nature of empathy. So that is to evolving or to cultivating the mind. The meditating bodhicitta means bodhicitta is the object and you are concentrating on that is not the way. You have to convert your mind itself into a bodhicitta, into a loving kindness or into the karuna. So this is second kind of meditation. And the third kind of meditation is visualization. It comes largely in the Vajrayana, in the tantric practices. When you do tantric practices at the Chirim Utpat Karam, you visualize the mandala, the deity, you yourself visualize in the deity and then concentrate on that. So this kind of a visualization is of course in the beginning a kind of fantasy, imagination, but slowly you are practicing it, then it becomes at a stage some kind of semi-reality, and finally it becomes reality. So the whole meditation, as we call meditation, can be categorized in this three group. This three group also necessarily belonging to two group, either concentrative mind or analytical mind. Meditating with analytical or meditating with concentration or attention. So these are the broad category of the meditation or meditative mind. Whatever meditation you do, you need as a indispensable instrument of two matter facet, that is anusmrit, the memory, and the other is sampragyana, the alertness or the awareness. The Buddhist terminologies in recent times translated into English language in many different ways. So there is no unanimity In the 7th century and 8th century, under the leadership of Acharya Shantarachit, the Tibetan translators begin to translate the whole Buddhist canon from Sanskrit, Pali or other languages to Tibetan language. At that time, it was very systematic. The first, they have developed the law of translation, and then they prepared an official dictionary. Three Vidpat. And then also they have translated number of dictionaries from Sanskrit to Tibet, include the Amarkosh. So that make the whole translation in uniformity. Whatever the Sanskrit terminology, one translator used in the Tibetan terminology, all the other translators also use that same. So therefore the ancient Tibetan translation was very accurate and very authentic. Since late 19th century and early 20th century, the Western scholars begin to translate from Tibet or from Sanskrit, some Buddhist canon, to Western languages. Then each different translator use different terms. So therefore today we do not have a very unanimity in the terminology. So therefore the Anusmrit, the Smrit is translated into memory, and it also translated some other words, returning or something like that. Similarly, the Sampragyana has translated into awareness, observation or attentive, alertness. So a number of these words have been used. So I don't know which one is the most accurate. So I would use for the Smrit, memory is, I think, more appropriate term, because something happened in the past, and what happened in the past shall have to be retained in the mind without losing the memory. That is the work of the Smrit. So the memory is more appropriate. Then Sampragyana is to alert the mind and to put the mind from scattering to back to the main objective. So this is apart from the memory only remembers what just has passed, and the Sampragyana make recognition what the moment before had happened. It is right or it is wrong. It is right, then it should be continued, or it is wrong, then it shall have to be changed. That is the work of the Sampragyana. So this may be awareness or alertness. So I may use the awareness. And coming together the memory and the Sampragyana, the Smrit and Sampragyana, and working with the meditation, then this may be called perhaps observation, watching or observation. my association with Jiddu Krishnamurti, he was not a Buddhist meditator, a Buddhist scholar. He has his own way of thinking and way of talking, and he has his own set of terminology. So when we analyze then deeply his usage of terminology are quite meaningful. So therefore I also use, when I talk about Buddhist meditation, his usage of terminology is more suitable for the Buddhist terminology as well. Therefore he always use the word of observation. And observation also he sometimes qualified choiceless observation, and it has its own meaning, choiceless observation, and watching the minds itself. Then similarly, the awareness and memory and awareness he quite often use. Then also the concentration and attention, these two different words in English, and he prefers to use attention, attentiveness for the concentrative meditation instead of concentration. And that also, if we look into deeply, it is something relevance. So now coming back to the practice of mindfulness, the four set of mindfulness, the mindfulness itself is not a full-fledged meditation of concentrative or analytical, but this mindfulness, the four categories of mindfulness, goes to all different kind of meditation. Whatever you do meditate, and all meditation needs the assistance of this mindfulness. Now I use the mindfulness here for the Smit Upasthana. Smit Upasthana has two words put together. Smit means memory, Upasthana means to put down or to establish. Some of the Buddhist dictionaries use for the Tambanyasha as close contemplation. Close contemplation. I don't know why they put the close. I could not ask the dictionary writers, or even this is being used by many translators for the Smit Upasthana is translated as a close contemplation, close contemplativeness or something. So this I do not understand. So therefore the mindfulness is now in the common usage, so we may use this mindfulness. Though having said that, as I mentioned before, on the 37 Bodhipaksh Dharma or Bodhipaksh phenomena, the 4 mindfulness is the first. So it begins right from the preliminary stage and it goes up to the Buddha nature. So it has 4 internal categories. The first is body, the kaya, Smituvasthana, and the second is the Vedana, Smituvasthana, and the third is the mind, Smituvasthana, and the fourth is Dharma Upasthana. And it begins from the body. And the objective of these 4 categories of contemplative or meditative practice is in order to understand the deepest many of the 4 noble truths. Practicing on the body, it will help to realize the truth of misery, and meditating on the feeling, it will facilitate to realize the cause of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering. And meditating on the mind, it will facilitate or help for the meditator to understand the cessation of the misery, and meditating on the phenomenon, on the dharma, that will help the truth of path. So these are the specific purpose of meditating on these 4 objectives. In some of the treatises, there are 3. The Dharma Anusmit Upasthana is not counted, but usually when we talk about this as part of 37 Bodhipaksh Dharma, then this is 4, always 4. Now, to understand the whole philosophy of this 4 meditation, we need to understand a little bit about our mind. The mind is very complex nature, As I mentioned before, the human mind does not in usage or in active the whole. Only a very small segment of it is in usage, and the rest is if we use the modern psychological term, it remains in the subconscious. The conscious mind and the subconscious mind. In the Buddhist terminology, we don't say subconscious, but the active mind and the sleepy mind. The sleepy mind is much more, and it has much more capacity, and the active mind is a very small segment of the whole mindset. And this mind in the Western sciences, particularly science of mind or psychological studies, as a very gross statement about it. The ancient Indian science of mind has a great detailed study of the mindset. For example, the Buddhist Abhidhamma or Buddhist science of mind, when we categorize, we study the mind, the mental facets which are actually working or engaging into the objects is in 52 different categories, and each different category has its own characteristic and its own way of working. And in Pali Abhidhamma, these facets are much more. There are more than 100. And these differentiations and this different way of working, the ordinary people do not know. But for our own day-to-day understanding or day-to-day looking back to the mind, we must understand the two different categories of the mind. So I used to say, this is my own coined terminology, the conceiving mind and the perceiving mind. One set of mind is conceiving mind. It is only conception, but it does not have a perception. Perception means direct contact with the object, and conception means not direct contact with the real object, but it deals with the image of the object, image of the real object. So broadly, the entire our mind can be put into these two categories. The perceiving mind is seeing the reality, and it is innocent, and it is not contaminated, and it has a clarity. For example, the eye consciousness sees a color. The eye consciousness, the eye organ, and the reality of the color which exists outside. The color the reality of color appears to the eye organ or reflects to the eye organ, then eye consciousness sees the color. But the eye consciousness does not have any discriminative capacity. Eye consciousness does not say this is blue or this is yellow, but the eye consciousness is just seeing. It has no name, or it has no differentiation, this is beautiful or this is ugly, this is bright or this is dull. Eye consciousness doesn't have this kind of function. Only perceive what is there. Similarly, the hearing, the voice, the smelling, the smell, the tasting, or the touching, all these are direct perception which has the real direct contact with the object, and it sees or hears or smells the object as it is without any distortion. Just after, for example, when we see a color by eye consciousness and it sends a message to the thought. The thought is a conceiving mind. Then thought does not reach to the color, but what the eye consciousness send a picture or image of color into the thought realm, then thought carries that image, and then thought says this is blue, this is red, this is white. The names are all in the memory of the thought, and this is good and this is bad. I must have it, I must discard it. All kind of things comes in the conceiving mind. Then conceiving mind carries the color, the image of the color all the time. The color is past, no more exists there, but the image remains there. Even our childhood, if we see something beautiful, we still have the memory of it, and with that memory we carry the image of that. So these are all conception or concept. The concept mind is in the category of thought, and thought is the cause of all our problems. Because then it divides, it evaluates, and by that way it creates hate, greed, all kind of negative, positive emotions are arising out of that. So the perceiving mind is a kind of innocent mind, but the conceiving mind distorts whatever you have perceived, and then it processes in your thought realm, and that makes the entire world affairs, the good, the bad, the conflicts and the different things, the comparison and competition and enemies and friends and so on and so forth. All this comes. Then that is the real realm of defaultment. Defaultment means the affiliation of mind, the klesha in Sanskrit or Tibetan with nyumu. So there are so many different kind of nyumu. They are ingve, their hate, their attachment, and their greed, and so on and so forth, and numerous this kind of negative emotions are all caused by their thought. And all this thought, all this realm of conceiving mind is come out of the ignorance, as I mentioned before. Now the ignorance in the ordinary conversation, the English, we use the term ego. I think that is okay. We use ego for the Buddhist terminology of Maripa or the Danzin. Danzin means hang upon non-existent self, or grasping on a non-existent self. So thereby the self-realization is being denied. Due to this misconception, we are not able to realize the self. Without the realization of self, we are not able to realize the others as well. So therefore, the equanimity, the equality of self and the other is not able to establish because of the ignorance of the self. And due to that ignorance of self, we consider self is much more important than the other. And then this all kind of selfish mindset is come out. So this is a statement of the facts. And this ignorance of self has a number of grounds. And that misconception considers the body as the embodiment of the self, or the abode of self. And the feelings consider it is what I should say, the property on which the person owns, on which a person is established. And the mind, that is the self itself. The mind is considered to be as a self. And the phenomenon or the dharma is something which is to be owned or to be consumed or to be used or to be a kind of thing which a self can have ownership or use or consume. So this kind of misconception comes all together. So therefore, to dismantle this misconception, we have to understand the reality of the body. We have to understand the reality of the feeling. We have to understand the reality of the mind. And we have to understand finally the real position of the phenomenon. So therefore, this 4 category is in order to, firstly, to understand the 4 noble truths, and secondly, to dismantle the misconception of self or the ignorance. So this is broad framework of this four category of Chaturush, Smriti, Prasthana, Upasthana. So this can go like that. Now we come to the first one. Anusmita Upasthan of the Kaya, the body, we need to understand what is body. According to the Paramitayan, the body is categorized into three different kinds: the outer body, the inner body, and the common outer and the inner both common body. There are three different bodies. And according to Vajrayana, the body is divided into gross body, subtle body, and the subtlest body. So they are again three different kind of body. So in the Paramitayan, अब समय Alankar talk about the outer body is the gross body which we see, which we move, which we touch. This gross body is outer structure of the inner body. It is not real inner body, but it is out structure on which the inner body is remained, or it depends. The outer body has some damage, the inner body is also ought to be damaged. So therefore the out structure, the biologist can talk about how many bones and how many flesh and how many things are put together, and that's the outer body. Then the inner body is the organs. All these sensory minds has a five sensory mind has a five organs on which the sensory mind is dependent, or which the sensory minds are arising. The organ, the Sanskrit we call it Indra. That means we call it inner clarity of a form. That is a little tricky to understand. The flesh nature of eye is the structure of the eye organ, not the eye organ. The eye organ is inside. There's something which is not tangible, but which exists a kind of clear form. Today in the medical terms, they talk about the retina and something, and like that, all the tangible or touchable, the gross form is we call one thing kopa. That means the structure for the organ, and in that the organ lies. The one thing kopa, the structure of the organ is damaged, then the organ, the womb is also damaged. Then you might have the consciousness inside, but that consciousness cannot work because its channel, the organ is being damaged. So similarly, the eye organ, the ear organ, or the nostril, or the tongue, or the body, all the five sensory perceptions or five sensory minds has a visible organ. The sixth sense, or the sixth, that is mind, it does not need a structure. It has its own, the ongoing mindset is become a kind of organ. So that cannot be easily damaged. But in the modern science, they think that the brain is organ for the thought and mind, and it might be some relevance, but as yet the modern science always think that there's no difference between brain cells and the mind. But gradually there are many questions and doubts are arising. If there is a difference between the so-called mind and the brain, as the modern science people until now consider no difference, they are all one, is now questionable. And I think the people, the modern scientists, particularly the neuroscientists, neurologists, are beginning to questioning this, because so-called the brain death, a person's brain completely ceases to function, yet the mind is acting. The death samadhi, some people after death, they remain in meditation for 7 days or 10 days or 21 days. The longest samadhi, the Tubdam, was the late Gadentiwa Losanyima, who remained 21 days after his complete death, as a clinical death. He remained in that meditativeness, and thereby his body remained completely intact. And his Holiness Senior Tutor, Jabjilin Rinpoche, remained for 13 days, I very much remember. And I had the chance to see his body on the 11th day, and it was as if just still alive. So the subtle consciousness and the structure of brain, they are completely unrelated as mentioned in the Buddhist canon, but now the science people also realizing there's something like that. So in the near future or in distant future, they might discover something very different than that of the today's concept of neuroscience or biologists' way of thinking. So this is not relevant here. I'm just casually talking about. So for the meditation of Kaya Anusmita Upasthana, first we should know what is body. So the first body is the composition of blood, flesh, bone, and all these things which are very sophisticatedly and complexly built up and functioning interrelatedly and interdependently functioning. The medical science people know how the human body is something very unique, and it is functioning in a very coordinated way and balanced way when we are in health. Then there's little bit of imbalance, the health is disturbed. And we should also know that the body, not only human body, anything which is having a gross shape or form, are composite of 4 basic elements. And the 4 basic elements are compose, decompose, disintegrate. All these are happening in the 5th element of space. So this is a law of nature. Law of nature is being explained in many different ways. Largely, who have the faith into the Creator, then the law of nature is considered to be the Creator's sweet will. The creators have created in this way. And who are not believing or do not have faith into the Creator, then they say it is the coming into being in this order, in this law, due to the collective karma, collective karmic force of the all sentient beings living on it or using this. Because there cannot be a systematical, rational, logically can explain why the water is always liquid, why the fire is always burning, why the air is always moving. This is, we shall have to say, it is nature, it is law of nature, and there's no further reasoning can be find or can be explained. So therefore, the karmic force or the Creator, these two are ultimately to explain the composition or decomposition, came into being or destroying it. So by that way, the principle of impermanence, transitoriness is also very easily established because of the moment of this moment of composing, decomposing, coming together and going differently by the smallest particles of the 4 different elements. Since the body or anything which are composite of 4 basic elements. They can be divided into 2 categories, which are carried or owned by a consciousness, that is the body of a sentient being. Any composite thing which does not owned by a consciousness or functioning or controlled by any consciousness, that is matter, just a matter. Matter and mind basically different, and there's nothing which can go mind and matter together, but matter is being regulated by mind or owned by mind, that makes a body, and which is not owned by any consciousness or mind, that is just a simply matter or a gross thing. So, for example, the present body of oneself. The present body of oneself, we are born from parents, and our body, the gross body, the cause comes from the genetical process of parents, and this body has a basic cause which is coming from our ancestors, and it has no beginning, so it comes down like that. Then it grows and it fully matured, and the growth is also into an order. Proportionately it grows. The human body, hands and feet and the belly and the head, all are a kind of pre-designed, and it grows into that order. If it does not grow in that order, and it grows in some different direction, then the body become a kind of handicap or dysfunctional. Then it has a limitation or a kind of quantity up to which it may evolve and it may grow. Then it decay begins, and finally it decay, and finally it disappear. So this cycle is inevitable and undeniable. No one can go beyond this order. Born, growth, decay and death, these are naturally completely bound. But when we are in usage of this body, there is a gross misconception, a number of misconceptions at many times body is being considered as the self. Someone hit to your body and you immediately think and say, he hit me, not my body. It never say he is hitting my body. It says it is hitting to me. So at that time, our conceived mind has no differentiation between the body and the self. The body is sick. No one says, my body is sick. Everyone says, I am sick. I have to treat. Like that. Some other times, the body is not me, and the conceived mind says, my hand, my head, my chest. Then in that way, the misconception of thought always think me is something different, who owns or who uses this body. And in that way, if you search, everything is different from the me. My mind, my brain, my heart. So speaking like that or thinking in that term, it also goes alternatively. So this kind of looking at body or looking at mind or looking at the self, there are enormous mixing up, confusion and misconception always goes there. So we are completely unaware. When we say I'm sick, I'm hurt, somebody hit me and I'm hurt, at that time the body and the self are treated or considered as completely one. And at that moment, we do not have any awareness that I am thinking my body is me, or I am conceiving there is no difference between me and my body. Your thought process goes in that way, but you do not have awareness of that thought process. And at many times, in the biological or medical terms, involuntary. Some dust comes to your eye, near to your eye layers immediately shut down to protect it. Or something hit into your head, your hand immediately goes. So these are tells as involuntary. In reality, these are not involuntary. A thought process always goes with that, but we call it involuntary. But at that time, we are completely unaware how it goes, how it acts. So, grossly, we may say 90% of our body movements and our body functioning or our body usage go unawarely, and we have no awareness of all these things. Due to this unawareness, the misconception the body is me, or I am the owner of the body, thus misconception of self and misconception of body always goes together. So therefore, as a easiest way or as a first step to practice the establishment of mindfulness of the body is easy to practice and also necessary. If you have a full awareness of your body, then your mind has quite a elevated thing. The quality of mind would be very different from our usual mind. And in that way, I should say, we might able to not only in the spiritual way, but in the ordinary way also, we might have much better health and much better security and so on and so forth, if you have a complete awareness of your body. So therefore, the first practice of Smrit Upasthana of body, the mindfulness of the body, that is a beginning of transforming your mind, not only transforming your mind, but also transforming your body. The body and mind both can transform spontaneously, and you will have a better and a greater quality of mind and body through which you can pursue the spiritual journey more effectively, appropriately, and also leading a peaceful and harmonious way of life in the ordinary day-to-day life as well. And it may also improve your relationship with the other sentient beings. So there are many benefits it may derive. At this moment, we are completely unaware of our unawareness of the body. The first, we are unaware of the body, and the second, we are also unaware of our body. Nobody thinks that I am not aware of my body. Everyone thinks that I am aware of my body. So first we have to realize the unawareness of the body, and then thereafter the practice of awareness of the body to establish a awareness. As I mentioned, the mindfulness is a combination of awareness and memory. So first we have to establish awareness of the body, and thereby the quality of your mind can be considerably improved and transformed. So to be aware of your body, as I mentioned before, you need to roughly understand what is outer body, what is inner body, what is inner and outer body both. Perhaps I have not mentioned this. The both is the whole body, as we categorize the structure of the organs are outer body and the organs are inner body, then the totality of the structure and organ, that is the both of the inner and outer body. So these three category of body need to be understood. And if you further need to analyze the body, then as I mentioned before, according to the Tantrayana, the gross body, that is visible our body, and the subtle body is the force, or it is the wind or the breath. Breath is not the totality of the prana. The prana is the moving force which is the vehicle of our mind. Our mind cannot go to the object or cannot think or cannot contemplate without the vehicle of the moving force. The gross moving force is the breathing, the wind, and the subtle moving force is, even there's no breathing, there is a force of momentum, and that momentum is the in Sanskrit we call prana, and lung yana so. So that is the subtle body. The subtlest body is invisible at the moment. The subtlest force of moving, which comes from previous life and which goes to next life. So this is the tangible evidence of the continuity of life, the past life, the present life, and the future life. The Buddhist logic is the beginningless of the consciousness, and the beginningless of consciousness is also supported by the beginningless of the moving force, the subtlest prana. So by this way it goes like that. So this is just background of the how to begin the meditation of mindfulness of the body. So this much knowledge or this much understanding is necessary. Now come to the practical thing, how to start the meditation of mindfulness of body. So that I think these days meditation is very popular and everybody claims to meditate. So I don't need to go into the preliminary things. I hope everybody must be aware. But if someone not aware, so I will very briefly mention today. Before meditation, one very important thing is to examine the intention of meditation. Why one is intend to meditate. So there can be so many different intentions. But basically, for the purpose of immediate worldly benefit or for the purpose of spiritual journey, your meditation is just to immediate benefits such as achieve a kind of tension-free mind or stress management or increase of your efficiency. This become a common objective and a common goal for many meditators. You might be aware that my late friend Acharya Satnarayan Goenka ji have established 10 days meditation program in India, now in abroad also, in a very large scale. In the beginning 10 days camp and then thereafter 20 days and finally 40 days. There are many good meditators are there. They're called Vipassana. It is Theravadan Buddhist tradition from Burma he brought back to India. The second, when he come back to India, the second his meditation camp, 10 days meditation camp was held in Varanasi in 1972. Many of you might have not born at that time. And after 10 days, on the concluding session, I was also invited as a Buddhist monk. So we discussed why you make this 10 days course, and he talked about his teacher, and he says in the 20th century, at that time 21st century is a bit far, in the 20th century people have no time to meditate whole life, so people can spare 10 days, not very easily, but many people can spare 10 days. So therefore, to reach the great benefit of Buddha's meditation to the people, my teacher has innovated this 10 days course. So we appreciate it. What I am telling is, later on, this meditation system become a kind of secular. Muslims and Christians and many other faiths are also joined to that meditation camp. And after few years, the larger participants are the factory workers and multinational company staff. They have been officially sent to this meditation. They says it improves their output and it also improves the human management, and there's no labor strike and so on and so forth. So people use in that direction as well, and it may not be an appropriate objective, but we cannot deny this is also requirement for the humanity. So the first thing is to examine one's intention. Why to spend 50 minutes or half an hour from the most busy life, and particularly to put away your laptop or smartphone away. I say this, that these days younger generation putting the smartphone away is quite difficult, and always they are attached to that. So you must examine the intention why you are sitting down and spending few minutes or half an hour for meditation. It is for a spiritual elevation or spiritual journey. Then the aspiration or the intention should be more purified, and instead of for one's own benefit, then it should be considered or dedicated for the benefit of entire sentient being, and I should serve the entire sentient being, and for that I must achieve some spiritual elevation, and for that I am going to meditate. Otherwise, if you have some inconvenient or disease to your body, and for that it's okay. So whatever it may be, the intention and the aspiration for the meditation should be good, pure, and not much selfish nature. So this is one of the importance. And the second thing, today younger generation has a habit of immediate result, expectation of immediate result, and that is also one of the inappropriate intention. Meditation may give a tangible result in few months or in few years, or it may not give any result. So by assumption or expectation that if I meditate 1 month or 2 months, I will get this and I will get that, and so this kind of expectation is also not good for a serious meditator. If someone wanted to experiment, then it is okay. Otherwise, then third thing which I used to tell most of my friends is that today there are so many different systems and methods of meditation. The market of meditation is so rich. You have numerous choices. In that also, in the beginning, you may try a number of different things, but when you really seriously begin to meditate or have intention to continue it, then you have to choose one method, one system which is most suitable to you, and study it thoroughly. And if you have a teacher, go to the teacher, ask all your doubts, and you must have adequate knowledge how to meditate. And then one system should be stick. Each week or each month you choose from one to another to third and fourth, then there will be no tangible result. So in the beginning one may try to number of different things, but whatever is find more suitable to oneself, then later on one must stick to it. And the third thing, if any serious meditator, continuity is very important. Once meditate hours together one day, and the next day there's no meditation, and then for weeks there's no meditation, and then again you meditate number of hours, that will not make any progress. Progress means to improve your mindset, to transform your mindset. If you meditate 10 minutes or 15 minutes, do it every day, and if possible at same time. If not possible, of course you can do whenever you get time. If possible, you set a time aside, either in the morning or in the afternoon or evening, whenever you can get a spare time. That should be regularly. It may not be long time. 20 minutes, 50 minutes, 20 minutes is also good time. And then when you progress in your meditation, then the time duration will increase automatically, effortlessly. Then it's okay. Until that, regularity is very important. So these are few preliminary things. If someone, I don't know anyone in this gathering has intention to meditate. If you don't have intention, then it's okay. Enjoy your life. Meditation is not a necessary part of life. And if anyone has the intention, then the few things, preliminary knowledges are necessary. Now this is time to stop. The watch says it's 4 o'clock, and we are under the compulsion of time schedule in the 21st century. So tomorrow, little bit, if there are any beginners, little bit how to sit posture and how to do before the meditation. Then tomorrow we'll talk about how to meditate the mindfulness of body. Thank you for your attention.